Session 7 of the Guildford Junior Chess Club featured pawn storms, and we discussed attacking methods against the enemy king. I pulled out a couple of really entertaining games, and we're going to take a look at one of them now. It's an old game from the London Lloyds Bank tournament played in 1978 between international master Peter Large and international master from Scotland, Andrew Muir. The game starts life as a Sicilian defence, with Muir playing his favourite classical variation. We call it the classical variation because Black's not concentrating on anything fancy, he's just developing his pieces in classical fashion. And it's a very solid way to play. White generally chooses here between bishop g5, which is the rouser variation, bishop e2, bishop e3, or bishop c4, which is one of the more aggressive systems. This is known as the Sozin variation, and the great Bobby Fischer tended to favour this method against either the Najdorf variation, where Black plays with an early e6, or the classical variation as here. One of the points of it is that White wants to attack the Black king side, and in particular he's eyeing up the squares e6 and f7. Now you might think that e6 by Black solves all the problems because Black puts a brick wall in front of the bishop on c4. But White now makes a careful retreat, and he's going to try to open up the game, well, he quite often does in the Sozin variation, with the help of the moves f4, f5, when the e6 square comes under serious pressure. And so whatever Black does, he's got to be aware that this advance lurks waiting in the wings. Well, Muir played bishop e7, and White played bishop e3. Castles. Large chooses another system called the Velimirovich attack. Again, a highly aggressive weapon for White. You'll note that White is not wasting any time developing his pieces. The general aim in this position is to castle on the queen side. And once we've set up an opposite sides castling situation, then I think the pawn storm comes very much into play. The general rule of this type of position is that whoever is quickest wins. Whoever gets onto the attack fastest generally has the better chances in positions of this type. Well, as is typical of many sharp opening variations, there's an awful lot of theory on this line, and Muir just plays an outwardly modest move to start with, queen c7, but Black is going to develop his pieces pretty quickly after this. He's going to think about b5, he's going to think about moving his rooks to the centre, and he's going to think about putting pressure on White's queen side. So it's up to White to get on with it. Large play g4, which is again the standard move in the Velimirovich attack. Clearly White could play f4 here, he could play h4, but g4 I think is the best because White's intending to give that knight on f6 a poke very quickly, force it backwards, and then the attack rolls on with the help of moves like h4. So Black has to be quick, Black has to be accurate in defence in this position. Therefore Muir took off the knight. Interestingly, White took with the rook, and then comes b5. Now, just going back here, clearly White can take with the bishop. After that, he's got to reckon with moves like e5, when there's suddenly a double attack on both the bishop and the pawn. Now, why can't Black do the same thing? Well, he can, but it's been shown that rook c4 peculiarly ends up as quite good for White. The queen must move, then comes g5, then comes knight coming into d5. Black can get into a mess. So this is why Black prefers to advance on the queen side straight away. And you'll see that actually Black has now taken away c4 from the rook. So Black is probably threatening a move like e5 here, which is why Large keeps the ball rolling by playing g5, knight d7, and now a very interesting move, the fearless g6. And for young players, this move is very instructive. White attacks at speed. He's not worried about material. All he's interested in is getting onto the attack and levering open the Black king side. And that's exactly what happens. And with this pawn sacrifice, white puts black totally onto the defensive. So Muir moved his knight over to block. White ploughed on. Black took the pawn, hoping that he could defend. White played f4. So this is a double pawn sacrifice at the moment. And in fact, white is investing yet more material into the attack because black can play knight g3, forking the queen and rook, which is exactly what he did. Large deliberately gave up the rook, takes, and now quite an extraordinary move, really, which perhaps Muir underestimated. White didn't waste any time taking the knight. Instead, he moved his rook back. So the intention is totally clear. White wants to double pieces, major pieces on the h-file, and then give checkmate. So black moved out, decoying the white queen off the h-file, and now black played b4. Well, this wasn't going to stop Peter Large, who obviously was only interested in one thing, checkmate. Black took the knight, another sacrifice, and now another move which was not expected, at least by the kids. Bishop to d4. Now all the white pieces are suddenly pointing at the poor black king, and black has got to be very precise defending this position. But first, Muir flicks in a check, and white employs the standard procedure of not taking that pawn, which would open up his king, but using the enemy pawn as a shield. So the white king looks pretty safe now. And this is really the critical position of the game, where black has to find an only move, really. Now, in the game, Muir played f6. Okay, that does put up some sort of barricade, but ultimately it's not good enough. Instead, what he's got to do is to find queen a5. And this is not in itself a difficult move to find. The main idea is that at some point soon, black's going to swing the queen across to block the h-file. But he'll only do that when the white queen is on h3 or h2. So, for instance, if white tries to block the queen out, then the queen comes into d2. And now Muir probably saw to here and thought to himself, well, what am I doing in this position? It doesn't seem as though black has any more moves. But in fact, he does. He can play the extraordinary move bishop h4. And this is the saving grace. It's an extraordinary idea. And the point of it is that when white takes it, black can now fulfill his idea by moving the queen to h5. And extraordinarily, white doesn't have anything better than forcing a draw here. By moving the queen back, black moves. Now queen f2, renews the threat of queen to h2, and we get an extraordinary draw on the board with both players repeating the position. And nothing better for either side. But of course, that was pretty difficult to find. I mean, you've got to see bishop h4 several moves in advance. Back at the game, f6, unfortunately, allows the white queen too much scope. Rook came to b8. Rook came to h7. Threatening checkmate. There's nothing for black to do. He tried to defend with his queen, but now this nice backward move to finish the attack. Queen to h5. And that was the end of the affair. So what we learn from this is that any sort of pawn storm must be carried out at speed. Speed is of the essence. And you might have to even sacrifice. Use your pawns to lever open the position, maybe set up a sacrifice or two, and then come in with the big pieces at the end to finish the opponent off. Well, that's what happens in an ideal world. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed that game, and I'll see you next time.